Hi, and welcome back to The Life of a Writer. So today I wanted to do something a little bit different and take you behind the scenes and show you what it is I actually do when it comes to my writing. And so we're going to leave the preparation of the English library and food preparation and nature walks aside for this week so that I can take a little bit of time to demonstrate what the actual work is like. So I'm going to take you behind the scenes in terms of what I have to do to prepare my content for my serial novel for patrons on Patreon. And then I'm going to take you just briefly at the end behind the scenes with my poetry writing on LinkedIn. Before I show you exactly what it is that I do when it comes to the work itself, I wanted to say that one of the things that happens all the time is the unexpected. I get thrown curveballs, things that, I set out to do something and then all of a sudden there's a little hurdle. And this happened to me yesterday when I sat down to begin to process my episodes for March. And at the same time as processing these episodes, I wanted to film myself doing this so that I could make this video. So the first curveball that I was thrown yesterday, well, in essence, I threw it to myself, is when I went on Patreon to begin to look at how I was going to structure March's content. I discovered that I had not uploaded February's newsletter. Now, on the first of the month on Patreon, I always upload all of my content for that month. So a newsletter, 2 articles, the video, and the episodes for the month. And I like to do it that way so that patrons aren't inundated with emails and notifications throughout the month. It's just that one day, and then patrons can access that information, whenever they feel like it. And I realized that I hadn't done February's newsletter, which is so uncharacteristic of me. So all of a sudden, instead of getting on with March's work, I found myself backtracking, preparing February's newsletter, uploading it to Patreon a week late, and trying really hard not to get too upset by that, because it is really important for me to be punctual with this content. And I just had to do the self-talk, and it's like, it's February the 8th. It's still early February. There's still time. And then when I sat down to film myself working, I realized that I didn't have the software that I needed to do that. And nor did I realize that it was tricky. I just thought that was something that I could do on my computer. So all of a sudden, it was like I'm calling my son, the most wonderful tech support in the world, and then via cell phone, he was able to help me install the software and then teach me how to use it. And we did a couple of practice runs, and then I was able to make this video. So I think part of the work of being a writer in a public space and doing it the way that I'm doing is just being able to manage these little glitches and curveballs that come your way in the moment, especially the technological ones, and just take a deep breath and move your way through it. So this video is fairly technical, or at least it's a little bit dry, because I'm showing you the work, not all the nature and food, just to give you a little bit of a briefing before you watch. My main work, I still consider that to be The Girl on Harlow Street, which is this serial novel running on Patreon. And the history of that is I began hammering out the main ideas for it, the main plots and early scenes in 2017. I worked on it for a year, went to England in 2018, and began to start to very softly look for imagery and take photographs and just absorb the atmosphere, because my novel takes place in both modern day and Victorian England. Worked on it steadily, started my website in, I believe, at the end of I'm trying to think, was it 2018 or 2019? I think it was 2019. Started the website and began to write the novel essentially in public by uploading weekly chapters onto that website, and then anyone could read it. I had between 8 and 16 readers, and then I had other people dipping in and out of sections from various places in the world. So I did have a substantial amount of feedback during that process. Then once I finished that run, I pulled back a little bit and did some work. I was working with Kendra Guidelin, the editor, Erica Roldan, the marketer, and then in November of 2021, we had a book launch online to kickstart the novel's second run on Patreon. And so it has been running on Patreon on a weekly basis, an episode per week, since November 2021, so a year and a few months. The whole process for the whole novel to run its course on Patreon will be 2 to 2.5 years. That's my estimation. And so every month, for the people who are supporting me on Patreon, and it is a subscription-based platform, I provide a video, 2 articles, a newsletter. This is the behind-the-scenes stuff, and the episodes themselves. And that's how that process works. Sometimes I prepare long in advance, and sometimes I prepare quite close to the mark. So for example, now I'm preparing for March, which for me, even though March is a few weeks ago, is still, for me, I'm cutting it close to the wire. So I'm going to take you behind that process now. And again, I think this is a little bit of a dry video, but it certainly gives you an indication of how much work I put in behind the scenes, how much work goes into this, and how Patreon itself works for anyone who's interested in, well, in operating on Patreon. So I hope you enjoy it, and yeah, this is what I do. So the first thing I do when I'm preparing episodes and behind the scenes content for a given month on Patreon is I go to the document of the novel that contains the episodes for that given month. There are 4 or 5 huge documents that make up this novel because the novel is 1,500 pages. So I go to the document with the episodes for that month, and I go through those episodes and I accommodate, I either accept or reject the edits that editor Kendra has done on her second read of the novel. So I have a page up here to show you what Kendra does. So as you can see, she has put her suggested edit in pink. Here she's crossed out something that she thinks should be deleted, and she's inserted a word in pink, so she works in pink. And then if I go to the side here, there's a column where Kendra has put her comments. If I agree with an edit that she suggested, all I need to do is click and accept the suggestion. So click on the check mark, and then the text auto-corrects. If I don't agree with what she is suggesting, I can reject that suggestion, click on the X, and then simply the text stays the same. So I go through the episodes and I do that. Now this is a page that pertains to a future section of the novel because I did March's content yesterday. So if I scroll up to the stuff that I did yesterday, you can see that that the column here is now clear because I have either accepted or rejected Kendra's suggestions. Once this is done, it goes to Erica. So the episodes go to Erica, and Erica is a person who organized the book launch, and she does a little bit of marketing for me, but she helps me with so many things. And one of the things that she does is she formats these episodes for Patreon. The way that Patreon is structured is that in its post space where these episodes go, I can't indent and I can't use a traditional book sort of font that you see here. And of course, aesthetically, I want this novel, this series, to read as a hard copy of a novel would read. And so in order for that to happen, Erica has to format those episodes and then funnel them into the Patreon post spaces. And once that happens, I then have to go to Patreon and then read through those episodes to make sure there aren't any glitches or spacing problems that have occurred in that transition. So this process is a bit of an assembly line. If you think about it, even though Kendra did her edits quite a while ago, Kendra's work comes back to me. I accommodate that. I send the episodes to Erica. Erica formats them, and then I reread them looking for glitches and spacing errors or the odd typo that's occurred in that process that maybe I've missed on a first reading. This process is so important because as I am doing this, as I'm preparing the episodes for a given month, I'm rereading the novel for myself. And of course, I know the story, but the details and the nuances have faded over time because I wrote this between 3 years and a year and a half ago. And as I'm reading the novel, I'm coming up with the things that I want to share in the behind the scenes content for that given month. So for example, in March, as I was doing this yesterday, all of a sudden it's like, oh, okay, there's a scene that I'm going to delete, but I can actually do an article on that. I can share that deleted scene and I can tell people why I've deleted it. And I can tell you here, it's because it was a love scene involving cricket equipment of all things. And at the time I wrote it, I thought it was really funny, but on rereading it, it's like, no, that is not funny. It's just really clumsy and it doesn't fit in this part of the story. So in my reread, I decide, okay, I'm going to do an article on that. Also in rereading the episodes destined for March, I came across a scene which I remember doing an audio recording of in my main character's voice that nobody has ever heard before. And so all of a sudden it's like, okay, I can actually share that and do a bit of an article around it for the March behind the scenes content. I also discovered a discrepancy or a problem with the timeline of my female hero when it comes to her age and the timing. So I remember I did a timeline for that. I can actually bring in an article on the timeline and show where I've made the mistake. And so this process, I always do it first before I write the articles, before I do the newsletter, because in rereading, I will inevitably stumble on what I want to share in the additional content for a given month. Okay, so once I have all my episodes prepared for the given month, then what I do is I begin to prepare the newsletter. And bear in mind that, just as I said, as I've been doing those edits, as I've been rereading, I've already come up with what I want to share for the behind the scenes content for patrons for that month. So I'm going to use January as an example here. So I prepare the newsletter. Again, I prepare this and then it goes on to Patreon. And what I use to do the newsletter is I use a platform, a website called Canva. I pay about $150 for a year subscription, and then I have access to their fonts and their images, and I can create the newsletter on Canva and share that on Patreon. And so here's January's newsletter. When I'm writing the newsletter, I, of course, dear patrons, give the little preamble, and then I give them an overview of what is going to happen more or less. So a little bit of a heads up over the episodes that they're going to be reading. And then after that, but I don't give away any big secrets, but I give them just a little bit of a hint. Then I give an overview of the behind the scenes content, the 2 articles. And so in January, I wrote an article called Giving Birth on the Page, Writing a Baby into the Light, because there's a major birth that takes place in the novel in that section in Victorian times. And of course, I've never had a baby in Victorian times, but I drew on several things to write that scene, and I wanted to share that with readers. And then I wrote another article on property rights in the Victorian era, which definitely pertain to these episodes that I shared in January. And then again, I give a little bit of an overview on the video. January's video was on the themes that are woven in a little bit of a tangle that are all going to hopefully be resolved at the end of the story. And then I usually end with a little section on looking forward to what patrons can expect in the subsequent months. And then, yes, so that's the newsletter. So I'm just going to go back here and click on the articles so that you can take a look at how I structure those. And so this is the article on the property rights. This article is on the rules or the laws around housing, but also the laws around marriage, because in that time period, it was considered that the wife was the property of her husband. And so this definitely comes into play in January's episodes. And I have written an article on the legalities. Often in an article, I'll include a link to an article or sometimes a YouTube video that pertains to the subject matter of the article. And so just going back, I will click on the other articles that you can see that. So this is the article on the giving birth in the Victorian era and what I drew upon to write that scene. And so there you have, this is an example of my use of Canva, where I've taken an image from Canva and then I've embellished it with a few little, I guess, glowing butterflies from their graphics section to create the vibe of what I want for that image. So there's that article there. And then also every month I prepare a video. So just scrolling up to January's video. January's video again is on the themes that are in those episodes, and I process those through YouTube. They are unlisted, so only patrons can watch them. And usually in these videos, at least for the last 6 months, I have been discussing some of the themes and some of the deeper ideas that come into play in those episodes, or in the given month's episodes. So also, just before I sign off of this section, if you look at this list here, you can see how all these episodes, they always come out on a Friday at 7 a.m. And sometimes if there's an episode that was not in the original first version of the novel that's completely new, I will alert readers, because some of the patrons read the novel the first time through, and so I want to alert them that this episode is a completely new one. So as you can see, this is a fair amount of work because I'm going through the episodes, I'm preparing them, I'm getting them to Erica, and then once I've done that, I'm coming up with the articles and the video and then creating a newsletter. Usually I do the newsletter first because I already know what I'm going to do those things on. So that is the process for Patreon. The last thing that I want to say about what I do in the writing department in this life of a writer is that I write fairly regularly poetry on LinkedIn. I write it in real time in the post space. I don't prepare beforehand. This is fairly natural. It's almost done in a meditative state, and I've talked about this on previous videos. I was doing it every day last year. It was part of a morning practice, but now I'm probably doing it about twice a week, sometimes 3 times a week. And I'm not always doing it in the morning. I'm sometimes doing it in the evening as well. And I've got a poem up here on LinkedIn, you can see, and I always accompany the poem with a photograph or with a video that I'm using in order to stimulate my imagination or open up the channels for the poetry to come. So this is a photograph that was taken after a storm when the snow was just beginning to melt on the trees in the walking paths or in the woods behind my house. And then, that evening I looked at the poem I looked at the photograph, and then the words came to me. This is a very, very important process, because the other work that I've shared with you today is more, I don't want to say administrative, but it's more detailed. It is creative, but it's not creative in the way that creative writing and letting that flow come to you is. And so it's really important that I'm still feeding my creativity and my love of language in writing like this. And so by having whether it's regular poetry posts, whether they're daily or bi-weekly on LinkedIn, that then enables me to flex that creative, let's say, soul muscle, to keep that writing plate spinning, that creative, I'm going to call it soul space going, while I'm doing the more nitty-gritty detailed work of formatting things and preparing things for patrons on Patreon. So this is a very, very important part of my writing life. So I'm just sharing a couple of photographs now of the snow, again, that I took in the woods behind my house. And as you can see, in looking at that photo, it's then jump-started a poem, or it's the seed of a poem that's evolved right into the post space on LinkedIn. So I would say that while you're doing editing work, while you're doing administrative work, when it comes to formatting and preparing your writing for readers, it's also important to keep stimulating that creativity in yourself. And that's what I do with these regular poetry posts on LinkedIn. Okay, so there you have it. That is what I do when I prepare my content for a given month for patrons on Patreon, and also what I do on a more regular basis with regards to the poetry on LinkedIn. And it is actually a fair amount of work, but the most important thing is that it is work that I love, and it is creative work. And well, I'm just so happy to be doing it. But I hope that you found this, if you've stuck this far, I hope you found this video informative in terms of the work that I put in behind the scenes and what I do for Patreon. I am going to do another video in the future about my personal experience with Patreon so far, because at the moment that is again, it's my main work like I showed you today, but I wanted to give you some more detailed feedback on that, but I'm going to save that for another day. So we will see you next time on The Life of a Writer. Thank you.